Great, thank you so much, guys, for spending some time. I'm not going to take too long, but I just want to take you through what are the different ways that you actually need to basically dissect a company before you actually apply to them, to know them better and to know whether you can actually resonate with their, their remote culture, their remote journey, and that's where you want to be. So this is just Automattic's main page where they actually talk about their products. So of course, if you've used their products, if you've blogged at any point, I think WordPress would seem familiar to you guys. So I think it's important when you get to know or a role interests you guys, it's important to know the different products that they have in place. Then moving on to their About Us section. This again gives you an idea of the products as well. It's a little bit about their remote journey. So they're completely distributed with about more than 1,000 employees in 76 countries. And what you would see more often than not across their website is that they believe highly into diversity and inclusion. So if you are someone who's very comfortable and thrives in a diverse environment, I would advise you to kind of definitely look into the company and see, the kind of roles that they have. But it's extremely important to know for yourself whether that's where you would like to belong, and that's, that's where you see yourself in the future. Most of the companies also on their website basically state their values. Automatically has termed it differently here. Sorry, Automattic has termed it different here, which they call as creed. And I'll also dive into the work with us section, how you can exactly read that through. So the creed, they've written it in a first person. So what you can take away from this is basically the different values that they have, what they kind of see as soft skills in their candidates. So they talk about, someone who's always learning, someone who basically, works as a good team works well in a team and is always there to help out their colleagues, someone who basically is always motivated and disciplined, and at the same time communicates really well. So everything that's marked out in blue, if you actually, just read through it, they're also talking about their values and the skills that they're looking for in a candidate. So if you feel that you're the right fit, of course, I would suggest that make sure that when you're interviewing with companies, similar to these, that have the same values, you basically kind of tie in your goals and how you exactly would shine out with either of these skills. So this is their create section. Then, moving on to understand them better, they've basically been very explicit about their work with us section, where they talk about, how they like to communicate. So they have about, they have about more than 1,000 employees in 70 countries, and they usually communicate through Slack. So they believe in asynchronous communication, and they've stated that out again in their interview process. So if you are, again, comfortable in working in an environment that way where, you probably communicate with someone today on Slack and they would respond tomorrow, if that works for you, then, again, that the company would be a right fit. So what they've called out here is that 25% of their communication happens on Slack, while the rest 70 happens on their WordPress blogs, which is something that they call P2 themed WordPress blogs. They've again broken down what you can expect once you do join them. So, everybody who works, who's an employee with them, basically goes through the first 2 weeks as a customer support, and then moves on to, a week of support annually, eventually over a period of time, regardless of what the position that you might be joining them on. Besides that, they also have meetups. So if you, as a distributed company, they also make sure that they meet up once a year for 7 days a week. These are the past countries that they've been at. Like I said, they are they're very keen on diversity and inclusion. So they have an entire section. And I would say that, again, if you see something like this blaring out in a company's website page, make sure that you know exactly what they're looking for, and try that while you do talk to them in their behavioral interviews. They've also been they basically called out certain blogs that make sense for candidates or people who are looking to know about the company. One is the CEO's interview. And then they also have basically called out certain testimonials of people who are their colleagues. And, I think they purely talk about what their life is at Automattic and, what you can basically expect from them. This is the diversity page. See if you again resonate with these values, and like I said, tie them in whenever you're speaking to anyone from the company. I'm just going to quickly take you through a job description. Rule of thumb, you don't really always need to be a 100% match, but if you're about an 80% match, again, both on their soft skills as well as hard skills, I would say then, it's worth applying for the role and to the company. So simply, always make sure that you have the skills that are listed out in the requirement section. You resonate with their values, and yeah, and I think this section is purely on what you can expect from them. This also kind of leads you to, so this is for WooCommerce. So meeting Roy and Jeffrey, these are hiring managers. So, they lead you to the video where they purely talk about what they exactly do, what are the qualities that they look for in candidates for their teams. So I would say that it would make sense to kind of also dive in deeper into their profiles. So you can check their LinkedIn profiles, if they've written blogs on WordPress, definitely look into that. One, you get to know them better before you actually meet up with them or have an interview with them. And at the same time, it's a good icebreaker. If there's something in common that you have with the person, I think that would also give you the leverage to lead that conversation and seem interesting. So, and each of their job descriptions, if you see them really closely, you will always find these links of people who are working in their teams. So this is what, this is Roy. So it's again, just from the same link. With remote companies, transparency is key. So, they kind of make sure to also talk about their interview process. So they've again explicitly called out the fact that they actually communicate on Slack a lot more. So their first interview is on Slack, which is a 90-minute chat. Then moving on to a coding challenge, then a trial round. Most companies, rather Automattic has a trial round, which basically means that they work with you. It's a paid trial, so they work with you very closely for a week. This is ideally to determine whether you are a fit for the role, as well as if you really like working with the company, they then proceed to the offer stage. So again, transparency being key, you made sure to put out all of the details here on their how we hire developer section. And the last two sections is purely to get to know the company a lot more. They've obviously divided it as per the brands that they have. So if you're looking for something particularly about WordPress, you can just click on it and you're going to get a whole list of blogs that come out. The other thing is that if you, like I said, you want to know them better, you can basically look at the authors and dive into their personal space. So, if they have blogs, personally look them up on LinkedIn. If they've written out any articles over there and what they really feel professionally outside of the WordPress blog, I think that's one. Those are some of the ways besides, of course, LinkedIn and Google to get to know them better. And if you're a senior individual and you're looking for more more factual numbers, I think, this as a fact sheet, which is again, everything that's been printed out in the press to also know where the company is at this point of time. That they've got funded, so they'll probably be in the growth stage. I think this also kind of gives you a better idea of what you can expect from the company when you interview with them or when you join them. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I've pretty much taken you through their journey amongst different pages, and I think it's extremely important when you do apply for a role. Though the role seems exciting to you, I think it's more important to dive in deeper and see, whether you resonate, and that's where you see yourself at least for the next 5 years.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I think something that I forgot to mention at the beginning is based on the prep work or the survey that we sent out, the single most important reason why any of you or candidates in general seem to be interested in companies, whether remote or not, has to do with their values and culture and mission, right? Like you want to work somewhere where you can identify with what they're doing. And that is certainly true for remote companies as well. And we specifically picked Automattic to briefly show you kind of like the poster child of how transparency and employer branding is done. We know that they're doing an extremely good job. Fareen has basically taken you through all these different pages that are all part of the Automattic like ecosystem or site. Like you didn't have to go on any other platform or source except for YouTube, which they link to for the videos. But basically they make it really simple for you. Maybe you land on one of their job descriptions and say, oh, this could be for me. And then they give you all this other additional information that you can find directly through them. That said, they are not the norm. Like most companies do not look like Automattic. And we kind of identified the key aspects that we believe are really important when you are looking for, is this company the right company for me, whether they're remote or not. In remote, we basically say, well, first of all, like culture and values, you know, what you want to look out for is, do they have a clear mission and values? And then how much do you identify with those? So I think that's something that is really important. And one of the key things that hiring managers and recruiters now say is, we're not looking for people who fit that culture anymore, but we're looking for people who add to that culture. So I think that's really something important to ask yourself, is like, do I add any, or can I add anything to that particular culture? The second thing, which for Automattic is really easy because they are completely distributed, it's the question of, is that company remote first? Are they remote ready? Are remote employees treated equally to non-remote employees? Again, Automattic, 1,000+ people, no office, right? Very simple. They, you know, they're clearly remote first, remote only. So that's quite simple. And what's important there is what Fareen has mentioned, is the communication style, which for Automattic is very unique, and it is highly asynchronous because they are so distributed that a lot of the communication works on Slack, a lot of it works through documentation. So if you were someone who really likes face-to-face calls with your colleagues, Automattic will probably be the wrong environment for you. And you can find that out by looking at the Automattic page. So I think that's definitely the key takeaway from Automattic. I do want to take you through a company that someone, and I don't remember who it was, mentioned in the prep work. And I thought it was quite interesting because I hadn't heard of it before. And I started digging around the career page and like wanted to figure out, like, would this be a good remote company, let's say for me or for someone? And I want to take you through that process of how I went about it. And I'm going to share my screen. Please tell me when you see it. I'm going to share this one.
Yeah.
Do you see it? It should say Careers Astreya. I think that's what they're called. Not Australia or Astreya, but Astreya. So basically, I wanted to start going through this as if I had landed on them, whether it's through a job board where a role was posted that I just click on. I'm like, oh, hey, this looks interesting. And I get redirected to a job. Let's say this one, right? I get redirected to this. I'm like, okay, I've never heard of the company before. I have no idea what they're about, but I see this role, human resources director. I guess, you know, maybe I could apply to this. As a recruiter and an HR person, like I normally look at what ATS, so what applicant tracking system they're using. It's something that even if you're not in HR, I think it's an interesting indicator. You usually see it here in some form of the URL. Here it's not hidden at all. It's Smart Recruiters, that's their ATS. Some have Bamboo HR, some have Workable, Lever is another one. And that kind of shows you like if they have their shit together, if you want to call it that, in terms of recruiting. Usually when they have an ATS, it's a good sign because that means there's a very clear process and steps that people go through. So I went on this and I'm like, I don't know what Astreya is. I'm going to read through this. I think, okay, sounds somewhat interesting. What we noticed, I think like 2 minutes after opening this far yesterday, was that they have an issue with this. And first of all, we think it's very long. It's a lot of stuff to read. It's quite hard to figure out, like, do I even qualify for this, right? Here it does, it just says remote, like restrictions on it, no figure out that this is, I think it's a US based only role. And what they do here, if you just see like up here, it says your responsibilities and required qualifications. And then scroll down, and here it says required qualifications again. And turns out this is exactly the same paragraph as it is above. Here, what can Astreya offer you? Also appears here. So we were like, okay, something's off there. We may point it out to them that something in their ATS setup is not working quite right, but it is quite tedious to read this, right? If I were just to hit like, I'm interested and start applying, I probably wouldn't do a great job, and I'm still not sure if they're the right company. So what I want to do is very simply, here I want to look at, are they remote first? You know, like what's going on? Do they mostly have a headquarters and just 1 or 2 people remote, or is this like a really distributed company? One key thing you can always look at is what we call like the perks and benefits section, which they always name something different. In this case, it is what can Astreya offer you, right? And reading through all of these points, we noticed and we checked with other positions that are not remote at the same company that it actually is the same, and that these things apply to everyone. So it is not something like we have great cereal at the office every morning, right? Which is something that clearly does not apply to remote people, but only applies to people in the office. So it is a good sign if the perks and benefits are generally tailored to everybody and not just to a subset of employees. So this is usually one of the first things that you can very easily see on a job description. The next thing that I wanted to look at is like, okay, what other jobs do they offer? So that's where I go on the careers page and I see who else are they hiring? Are these all remote roles? Maybe then it's remote only, or maybe is it just 1 or 2 roles? Is it like, let's say mission critical roles that are remote, or is it just addition, like, you know, supporting roles? And kind of figure out like, you know, what would the team structure look like? And I picked Astreya because it took me a while to figure out what it is, and I'm going to share it with you. So Astreya is, they're quite big. They have, and that's actually the thing that I would do next, right? Is I would go here on contact and figure out where is their office, right? So always go and like figure out like what address do they have there? Do they have one? Here it's quite nice. They have 4. So it looks like they have 4 offices: US, Singapore, Ireland, and Switzerland. So 4 offices already makes them quite distributed in the sense that people across offices will work together and they don't have just one hub where people sit. So I think that's already a good sign. And then when you look at career paths, no, we don't. So they hire for a lot of roles, and you remember the offices there: Switzerland, Ireland, US, and Singapore. They hire in tons of other locations as well, right? So they hire London, Tokyo. Here's one that's remote, but it says, you know, Southern California and Midwest, Mountain View, Seattle, Menlo Park, all over, right? All over. And I was like, okay, what is this? And then I actually dug into their business model and I realized they hire people in specific locations as on-site consultants for their clients. So they want people to be in specific locations, and they are remote people, but they're, you know, they can't move anywhere. They're just in those specific locations. And the reason for that is actually quite simple. It is that they also do hardware logistics for IT stuff. So they just take you, I'm imagining like computers, servers, whatever, and, you know, bring those to and from your office if you wanted that. So which means they are actually super distributed. They have people all over the world that work in different locations, and these network deployment engineers just sit in some country and, you know, work there with the clients. And then there's roles that are seemingly completely remote, like that human resources director, right? So quite a unique company setup. Took me a while to figure this out. But if, you know, for whatever reason, you find a company that you come across that is a little bit difficult to understand, take that time, figure out like what is their setup, figure out like, would I be comfortable in this kind of environment? Maybe you come across a company that has one office, you know, with 80% of the staff sitting there and then only 20% remote all over the world, or remote in certain time zones. Think about like, is that really something that I want to get into? You know, am I the kind of person who has FOMO a lot? You know, that can happen when you are one of the few people who are remote and there's 80% of the people in an office. That may happen, right? So yeah, I think I really encourage you to dig around a little bit. You're going to learn a lot. It's going to make you better both for your application and for your interview process, for sure. Great, so that's the remote first topic. Culture and values for this company was a little harder to find because they have like the nice little image up here, and I can see, okay, they're, you know, they hug each other, they do some meetups, they play pool together, I think up here. But yeah, quite hard to figure out. So for this role, actually what I thought would be interesting is figure out like, what is the culture like, or the team like, that I will be working in. So remember here, human resources director. I want to find out like, what does that team look like? So what I do is here I go down and I say about us, I go on the leadership team, and turns out HR is usually at the bottom, and it is true. This woman, Erica here, she's in charge of talent and culture. So I looked at her LinkedIn when I pulled it up, but I can't get to it now.
There, so
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You can actually, and I clicked directly on the LinkedIn link and it works. So that's a good sign. And I checked her out, right? I looked at her, looked at like her articles and activity, and we're second degree, so I can see quite a lot. I'm not sure if she has it unlocked for people who are further away. But what I wanted to show you is just this one activity that she shared, which is 4 days ago. She was in SF with her leadership team, and they won an award, right? And they all kind of look fun, and she's posting about this, whatever. And I think that kind of is the direction that you should go into to look at the team that you want to work with. Check out LinkedIn, check out their profiles. Some companies like Help Scout and Automattic do it, that they give you the people you will be working with. But with a little bit of digging on LinkedIn, you can usually find that as well. Marketing people, if you want to work on marketing people tend to have blogs or Medium blogs or something like this. You can look at them as well, figure out what they're about. So really start getting creative about like where you can find information about people. Not to stalk them so much. I feel like that's like the one step too far. Like don't try and like hack their Instagram. But if they have a big Twitter following, for example, if the company has a big culture on Twitter, that can tell you a lot about how they work as well. And that's in the end where you want to identify and see, and really make sure that you understand a company that is not super well branded online. Yeah, and finally, I think what Fareen has mentioned earlier as well is, you must match the job description. In the remote world, that is definitely true, because there are so many people trying to apply to the same job. If you think you sort of match it like 50%, save yourself the time. And if you have, if you don't have any of the skills that are labeled as must have, also don't apply, because those are, and let's go back to like an ATS, right? It's like they are very good at filtering out people that don't have the skills that they want. So I think that's really where focus comes into play. And be honest with yourself, right? Be honest with yourself. Do I have this? Do I not have this? And then, yeah, let it go if that's not it. And I understand, and that's something that we actually discussed, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen if I can find it again. There we go. Stopped?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's basically to be honest with yourself and let it go. And what we talked about is that you basically don't want to get too involved with the company before you haven't like heard a sign from them that they would even interview you. I think that's what a lot of people tend to do, right, Far? So you send out the CV, you fill out the application questions, whatever it is, but you really don't want to think about it too much until they kind of come back to you and are interested in you. But that's actually the wrong way to go about it, because in your application, you want to stand out, and you can only do that if you have understood what your place would be at the company. And the rejection will hurt more. I know that from experience. That is like this is everywhere in life. When I want to reach out to a potential client, for example, I was in sales in a former life, and obviously with acework as well. You read something about someone or a company, and you write like the perfect pitch, the perfect personalized message to them, and you think you've like completely understood them and what they're about and what their problem is, and then they never write back, or they're like, worst case, they write back like, stop bothering me or something, so it's kind of, yeah, like it will hurt more the more effort you put in it, but in the end it will be worth it, because those personalized applications, they go further. Yeah, and I think that was, what is it called, Astreya, which I think was quite an interesting example. There were tons more that we wanted to pick that appeared multiple times. If you guys have a company that maybe you are unsure about, that you want us to dissect, that you want our input on, that you want to share about, or how you figured out who they were, I think that would be really cool.